Hey, it's Coach Anderson here again from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. Today we're going to start talking about the Roaring Twenties, one of the most colorful and one of the most exciting periods in the history of the United States of America, or so some would say. We're going to look at, the different cultural changes that happened during that particular time and find out what were some of the characteristics of the 20s that made it such an exciting time. So today we'll pick up with the Roaring Twenties. And we will start with lesson 1 in unit 7, the era of republicanism. The era of republicanism is going to be a 10-year period in the history of the country where Republicans, of course, will control the executive branch of the American government. We're going to have our unit focus question today, and as we will with every lesson, we give you a unit focus question. We won't answer that question, of course, but what we will do is give you that question so that you can be thinking about it as we go through each one of the lessons, of course, in this particular unit. The unit focus question says, what characteristics of the 1920s made it distinctly different from the previous decades in the United States? The vocabulary that we have today, of course, is academic and content vocabulary. We'll attempt, of course, to address these words as they come up, but if not, you go ahead and look them up yourself, and you'll do just fine. Our lesson focus question we will answer. The lesson focus question for lesson 1 is, why did the United States suffer so much economic upheaval following World War I? Today we'll start with the do now activity, and what we would like for you to do, of course, is take out your journals and write down the statement and then reflect on what that asks you to do. It says reflect on what the term graft means and write down what you remember. It's a term we've had before, so let's see what you can come up with. You should have had enough time that you were able, of course, to go ahead and look at that do now activity and that question. It says reflect the term graft, what it means, and then write down what you remember. What if you remember when we talked about progressive movement, we talked about patronage, and we said that patronage was one of those situations where people would, people would be hired into positions in the government, of course, and they use those positions, of course, to make as much money for themselves as they could. So graft means corruption. So with that, moving on, what we're going to do is talk about some of the graft that we have in the 1920s. Now, in 1920, Warren G. Harding would be elected president of the United States of America. One of the biggest reasons why he was elected is because he promised Americans a return to normalcy. But what Americans got was a return to patronage or cronyism. Basically, what Harding did is he put people in positions of power, and they used their positions of power, of course, to make as much money for themselves as they could. The most famous scandal during the Harding administration was the Teapot Dome scandal, in which his Secretary of the Interior sold illegal leases on public land or reserves on public land. Now, we also look at a couple more, Harry Daugherty scandal, where the Attorney General was accepting bribes from a German agent. So when we look at the Harding administration, the one thing that we can tell you about it, it was a situation where it was the beginning of republicanism, of course, in the country, and we're going to find that America, of course, is going to do quite well, but some of the people in the government will do just as well as the country is doing, through illegal means, of course. The stability of the Coolidge administration. When Harding died, he was replaced by his vice president, and his name, of course, was Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge began by firing some of Harding's corrupt cronies. What he wanted to do, of course, is clean up American government. And by cleaning up American government, what he was able to do, of course, is restore Americans' confidence in their government. The start of the 1920s prosperity. One of the things that we can say that Republicans did during this 10-year span is that they're going to bring a great deal of prosperity to the country, particularly because of Harding's Secretary of Treasury that was retained by Coolidge, Andrew Mellon. What he believed in was something called supply-side economics. What he believed was one of the basic tenets, of course, of republicanism, is that if you cut taxes, people would take the money, from those taxes and invest it, and by investing it, you would create even more tax revenue. Here we have some of Harding's holdovers, the ones that made a significant impact, a good impact on the country. Andrew Mellon, who was the Secretary of Treasury, and then we have Herbert Hoover. All right, when we look at American efforts to prevent wars, Coolidge's Secretary of State, Charles Evans Hughes, tried to utilize American prosperity to influence peace around the world. Now, Americans didn't believe, of course, getting involved in other people's business over across in Europe. So what we had retreated to was a policy of isolationism, where we said that let the problems of the rest of the world be the problems of the rest of the world. And what we wanted to do is put America first here and not allow, not allow the problems of the world, of course, to creep into the United States of America. However, we did do a few things, or get involved in a few things, of course, that were designed, of course, to prevent future wars, like the Dawes Plan, the Kellogg-Briand Pact, the Washington Conference, and then the London Naval Treaties. Here is a picture of Charles Evans Hughes. He was Coolidge's Secretary of State. All right, lesson focus question. Now, we gave you a lesson focus question at the beginning of this particular unit and lesson. It says, why did the United States suffer so much economic upheaval following World War I? Well, the answer to that is real simple. The threat of communism in Russia made Americans fearful of immigrants and unions and strikes. Strikes, women and minorities had to give up jobs returning to white soldiers. So we look in a situation where there's a lot of upheaval because, number one, the fear of Russia, what happened in Russia, of course, with the Bolshevik Revolution, and the fear that it was coming to the United States of America. In the 1920s, we experienced something called the Red Scare that we'll jump into a little bit later, and of course, and give you a little bit more background on. The increasing federal government corruption ended progressivism, and the end of the war saw farm prices drop because of overproduction and borrowing. One of the most significant groups in the 1920s that does not make a whole lot of prosperity or success is going to be the American farmer. And we'll jump into the reason why that will be a little bit later. What we have done, of course, is we try to give you some insights in terms of why the 1920s, of course, were so prosperous under those Republican presidents. And what we want you to do, of course, is what we always tell you to do. Don't take our word for it. Please go ahead and do your own research, because remember, America's history is your history. So make up your own mind, do your own research, and we'll see you next time.